Minnesota's got class. Now, what exactly is class? An introductory session on the classroom assessment and scoring system, and its use in Minnesota early childhood quality improvement efforts. Session objectives. Participants will gain an understanding of the areas and dimensions captured by the pre-K version of the class observation tool, the what, the why, so the why class is included in Minnesota quality improvement efforts, and finally the observation process, the who and the when. So what is quality? Quality in early childhood environments has gained a lot of attention in the recent years because research has shown that the quality of care makes a difference for children's social and academic growth and development. However, there are different ideas about how best to measure quality and then in turn improve it in pre-K settings. The next slide describes these differences and helps frame what class measures when assessing quality in early care settings. This slide was borrowed from the University of Virginia, where the classes originated. Basically what we're looking at here are there are two broad ways of looking at quality. There's the structural elements and the process. We know that both of them are important for children's academic and social development. The structural pieces include things like curriculum that's in place, the standards driving instruction, the materials, the teacher factors such as how long they've been in a profession and what their education and training has been. The other side of this is this process piece. So it's more of the implementation side. For example, how are the materials in the curriculum implemented? What are the relationships like between the adults and the children in the room and among the children? And what are the social and academic interactions? And what is the effect they have on the children? People used to think about structure and process affecting children equally, but the research has shown that the structural actually flows through the process. Perhaps an example will help. Have you ever had an experience where you've been using a new curriculum that was supposed to be the greatest material available, but it felt a little stiff or awkward to use in your teaching? In those first few days of using the new materials, what do you think was the effect on the children? Did they get everything possible they could have out of the curriculum? How about after you had become more familiar with the materials? Were you able to work with the materials in different ways to really help children learn and understand from the content? An example on the other side might help too. Have you ever had a really interactive and rich experience with a child or a group of children which hasn't necessarily been planned, but you and the children were really connected in a shared learning experience? What do you think that effect had on the interaction of the children? The second example is what class picks up on. It's the quality of the interactions and the relationships surrounding learning that really affect how much children are able to learn and experience. It also picks up on the strategies adults use to support children's social and academic growth. And research has shown that indeed it is the process piece that has the largest effect on children's outcomes. We're not saying that a curriculum and centers don't matter or they aren't important. We know they do. But it is the quality of the interactions and the implementation of the curricula and standards that has the strongest impact on how children learn. And this is exactly what the class measured. The class is an observation system where trained observers who are reliable on the tool observe in pre-K classrooms for about 2 hours. The observation is comprised of 4 consecutive cycles. Each cycle lasts about 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes of scoring. This process is then repeated 3 more times for a total of 4 cycles. Observers spend their time writing notes about the interactions, relationships, and strategies in place in classrooms that support children's learning and development. The class is looking to capture the average child's experience in that classroom. So all interactions, including those involving, for example, children playing together in a part of the room where adults are not right next to them, are included in the observation. This tool focuses on the whole classroom, not just the individual teacher. Since observers need to be able to see and hear the exchanges between children and adults, everything but outdoor recess is included and coded for the observation. The lens you choose to view a classroom determines what you will see, and observers who have been trained to use class in a reliable way spend a long time learning how to use the class lens when they are observing classrooms. You may have other observations completed in your classroom that will look for different things. When an observer uses class, they are looking for the interactions and relationships measured by the tool. So let's get to know the basic structure of the tool. The class is a tool that is divided into 3 broad areas, domains they are called, and 10 separate sub-areas called dimensions. Our training today focuses on becoming acquainted with these 10 dimensions and familiar with the types of interactions and relationships picked up by the tool. You will not be able to know the tool very well by the end of this training, but you will be able to know the basic structure. For example, it has 3 big areas and 10 separate dimensions that are all linked to children's learning. And you will hopefully be able to name a dimension or 2 that you think that are working well in your classroom, and maybe a dimension or 2 that you think is an area for growth and professional development. It was borrowed from a University of Virginia presentation back in 2007. And if we look at it, we see 3 broad domains listed across the top in bold: emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. It may be helpful to think about these 3 domains as the roles teachers play in their interactions with children in their rooms. So emotional support, which is the nurturer, so focusing on children's social and emotional well-being. Classroom organization is the manager, so how time and materials are used to promote children's engagement and behavior. And finally, instructional support, so the teacher, helping children think deeply about subject matter and promote their learning and language development. Below each domain, you'll see 3 to 4 dimensions listed. These are the 10 dimensions that we will cover briefly today to help you become familiar with the types of interactions and strategies picked up by the class. Each dimension will be described and highlighted with a video clip. Average scores from about 160 Minnesota programs participating in Parent Aware, which is Minnesota's pilot quality rating system for childcare settings, will also be shared. At the end of this training, you may not remember which dimension belongs to which domain or family of interactions, but you should leave with a good sense of the 3 broad areas captured by the tool. There is a lot of support for using this framework for analyzing classroom interactions. In fact, research studies in over 3,000 pre-K through 5th grade classrooms have validated the class domains as a valid and reliable way of measuring quality. Okay, so let's get started by covering the emotional support domain. Dimensions included in the emotional support domain look for evidence of relationships and emotional connections between children and adults, how children's social and academic needs are noticed and responded to in ways that promote student comfort, and the degree to which student autonomy and emphasis on their perspectives and points of view are emphasized in the classroom. Information describing the structure of the class in this training are taken directly from the class manual, the pre-K version, which is published by Brooks Publishing. This manual, along with the Dimension Guide produced by Teachstone in 2010, are important resources for programs using class. This activity is to get you thinking about how social and emotional aspects of the classroom are important for children's learning. You'll watch a short clip. As you watch the clip, take notes about very specific interactions, strategies, and evidence of relationships you see in this classroom that you think are most likely to help support children's social and academic development. Be as specific and concrete in your notes as possible. When you walk into any place, like a classroom, a meeting, or a public space, how do you know that people in the setting know and like each other? So, rather than saying, oh, they seem to get along, push yourself to describe why you think they get along. For example, maybe they're sitting close to one another, but what else? Complete your notes before moving on to the next slide.
What is it?
Alligator.
Just one alligator? Where's the head?
Up here.
Oh, does it have a tail?
Right there. Tail.
Yeah.
Happy.
How did you think to make an alligator?
Go back there. The book.
Oh, because Rochelle read the alligator book?
Tail.
Yeah. Do you want to make a picture of where the alligator lives?
See a wing. A one.
Yeah, I see that.
Probably had great examples of strategies on your list that relate to the class list above. That's great, because when you observe, you're picking up on subtle interactions and dynamics between the individuals in the room and can probably fairly easily group those into three broad domains: social emotional, managerial, and instructional. If something is on your list didn't quite match, that's okay. The list highlighted on this slide is not meant to be complete, so that could be one reason for a mismatch. Another likely reason is that the way class describes interactions is based on a very specific set of criteria tied to each dimension. So let's go through the 4 dimensions for the emotional support domain and highlight each of these more specifically. Positive climate is the first dimension included in the emotional support domain. It reflects the emotional connection between the teachers and students and among students, and the warmth, respect, and enjoyment communicated by verbal and nonverbal interactions. Positive climate looks for evidence that both teachers and children know and like each other and have a relationship with one another. For example, are there shared activities and cooperation? What is the amount and quality of social conversations in the classroom? Does evidence of smiling, laughter, and verbal and physical affection, calm voices exist? And do the emotions of all the children and adults match one another? Watch the video clip, and before you move to the next slide, write down evidence you see that you think highlights the bullets for this dimension. Do you see any evidence that the teacher and child share relationships? Are they sitting close to one another or far apart? Does the teacher's voice have a warm, respectful tone to it? And just a note about these clips, these are only intended to provide a brief snapshot of the dimension. Videos under 20 minutes are never scored, so the purpose is to just really highlight strategies that would be picked up by class for each of these dimensions. Teachers included in the clips represent real teachers in Minnesota who are kind enough and willing to share their tapes for professional development purposes.
Watch it. Really? How many horses do you have? How many? Here, let 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's coming.
So what did you see? Did you see the teacher and child smiling and laughing together? They were sitting close to one another, touching hands during the interaction. And finally, the teacher makes eye contact and speaks in a warm, calm voice. It is also important to mention that positive climate is not looking for one specific type of teacher. This one clip demonstrates a certain personality and style of interacting with children, but is by no means the only type class is looking for in a classroom demonstrating high positive climate. Strategies delivered by different teachers will manifest themselves in different ways. Class is looking for evidence that relationships, positive affect, and communications and respect exist because this is known to make a difference on children's learning. Ask yourself for each dimension, what does the effect of that dimension have on children's learning? This is what class is looking for, the effect of strategies and interaction patterns on children's social and academic learning possibilities. Negative climate is the second dimension under the emotional support domain. It reflects the overall level of expressed negativity in the classroom. The frequency, quality, and intensity of teacher and peer negativity are key to this scale. Negative climate is not the inverse of positive climate. Lower evidence of relationships and positive affect and communications would result in a lower score on positive climate. Negative climate is rather evidence of expressed negativity. So in other words, it's the amount of negativity, punitive control, sarcasm, or severe negativity in a classroom. Some examples include teacher irritability, anger, or harsh voice, threats, harsh punishment, or physical control. So for example, if a teacher said, "You will not go out for recess if you don't," etc. It includes teasing or humiliation, or bullying or victimization. Negative climate provides a good example of how the dimensions stand independently from one another. For instance, you can imagine a classroom where the overall Positive climate is quite high with lots of evidence of relationships, respect, and shared activities, but a fight between two children erupts in one corner of the classroom. Here's an example of how both positive climate and negative climate can receive a higher score at the same time. The level and type of negative climate is important because it also has a unique effect on children's opportunities to learn. And we do not have any video clips for negative climate. The third dimension under the emotional support domain is teacher sensitivity. It encompasses the teacher's awareness of and responsivity to students' academic and emotional needs. High levels of sensitivity facilitate students' ability to actively explore and learn because the teacher consistently provides comfort, reassurance, and encouragement. Teacher sensitivity reflects a certain amount of individualization because teachers need to know the children in their room and their needs to be able to help them address their academic and social needs. By doing so, a teacher can foster student comfort and helps children view adults in the room as sources of support, comfort, and security. Teacher sensitivity often unfolds as a cycle where a teacher notices a child struggling and how he or she then responds to that need and whether or not the problem is addressed. Student comfort also provides a good example of how class looks at the behaviors of students. Did the student or group of students seem comfortable with the solution? Did the student seek out the teacher when she or he was struggling with something and needed adult support and attention? These are examples of the questions answered by teacher sensitivity. Watch the clip below, and before moving on to the next slide, write down evidence you see that highlights the bullets for this dimension.
I want to do a snack.
Excellent choice.
I didn't get a job.
That's okay though, right? Will you get a job tomorrow, do you think?
No, I don't come tomorrow.
You're right, that's a good point. Will you get a job when you come back on Thursday? You'll have that going forward.
So class evidence highlighted in this clip around teacher sensitivity include the teacher noticed that the child was upset about not getting a job and then acknowledged the child's emotion. Continuing, he works with the child to find an acceptable solution, saying that she will have a job the next time she attends class. So far we have covered positive climate, negative climate, and teacher sensitivity under the emotional support domain. The fourth and final dimension for emotional support is called regard for student perspectives. It captures the degree to which the teacher's interactions with students and classroom activities place an emphasis on students' interests, motivations, and points of view, and encourage student responsibility and autonomy. Regard for student perspectives highlights who is in control of the activities in the classroom. To what degree are student ideas incorporated? If a book reading was planned, how did student interest in a particular topic area actually influence the teacher to choose a different book more related to the children's expressed interest? To what degree do children have choices and responsibilities? For instance, what jobs are children responsible for in your classroom? Are there line leaders, weather watchers, attendance takers? To what degree are children encouraged to talk? And how much freedom of movement do they have? Well, there are many times that children need to sit crisscross applesauce in a specific spot. How long do they need to stay there without wiggling? Are they able to take their writing project and lay on the floor? Or do they have to sit in one spot only? Regard for student perspectives is not saying all control is handed over to the children so that there is chaos. We are still focused on the effect of this dimension on children's learning. And in this case, how does involving their perspectives and points of view contribute to children's engagement and ability to learn? Watch the video clip below, and before moving on to the next slide, write down your evidence you see for what you think highlights the bullets for this dimension.
Seven, look at those pretty sparkly fairies.
I want to be a purple one.
You like the purple one?
I like the orange one. I like the green one. I like the blue one.
Raise your hand if you do you like the fairies on this page?
I do. I like the yellow one.
These are pretty sparkly fairies.
I like the
Perspectives. The evidence highlighted in this clip included there was flexibility in following the children's lead, and the children were allowed to freely share their ideas about their favorite character in the story. Showing Minnesota scores on the emotional support domain of the class tool. If you look at the column, this shows a little bit about the scoring process for the tool. A score of a 1 or a 2 is considered low range, and then moving upwards to high range quality of a 6 or a 7. Minnesota Parent Aware scores, which we're looking at here, are actually matching national data at this point, which has over 3,000 pre-K classrooms, meaning that what's happening here in Minnesota is reflecting what's happening nationwide. Research suggests that programs scoring a 5 or above in emotional support provide the quality and intensity of interactions necessary to boost children's performance on standardized achievement scores. And now we have been acquainted with the 4 dimensions included in the emotional support domain. So positive climate, negative climate, teacher sensitivity, and regard for student perspectives. Let's now move on to the second class domain known as classroom organization. Ask yourself, if children have activities to do and they really enjoy those activities, is behavior usually a problem? This is, in a nutshell, what the 3 dimensions cover in the classroom organization domain. The classroom organization dimensions are behavior management, productivity, and instructional learning formats. Before we go into describing the dimensions, let's follow the same process we did for emotional support by starting with a video clip. This time, we're going to watch the same clip we watched when we introduced the emotional support domain. But this time, we're going to focus on strategies and interactions that you think the teacher is using to help manage children's behavior. Notice how materials are prepared and ready, and how materials are managed or facilitated to get kids really involved or excited about learning. Again, be specific and concrete in the examples you write down on your paper. Complete your own notes before moving on to the next slide.
What is it? Just one alligator? Where's the head?
up here.
Does it have a tail?
Right there. Tail.
Yeah.
Happy.
How did you think to make an alligator? Oh, because Rochelle read the alligator book? Yeah. Do you want to make a picture of where that alligator lives?
See a wing, a worm.
Yeah, I see that.
So what did you write and notice in the clip that you think relates to teachers' management strategies? Some of the examples captured by the class include: there wasn't any learning time lost during this clip. There was a constant provision of activities. The teacher was involved and interested in the child's shine. She asked questions related to the drawing and encouraged participation. And then also expanding children's involvement by suggesting that he draw a picture of where the alligator lives. Looking at the student, we're going to see that he was actively engaged during this segment as well. How does your list compare to this time to the bullet points included here? Again, you probably have a handful that matched and a handful that were not quite the same. And for our purposes today, that's just fine. Now we'll move on to the 3 classroom organization dimensions to further clarify this second class domain. This domain is one that people tend to understand very quickly. Behavior management is the first dimension in the classroom organization domain. It encompasses the teacher's ability to provide clear behavioral expectations and use effective methods to prevent and redirect misbehavior. Behavior management looks at the extent to which student misbehavior affects student learning. It's hard to learn when classmates are misbehaving. And it's in this dimension where we can start by looking at student behavior. Are they compliant and cooperative? And chances are the strategies are in place for helping them manage their own behavior, even if those expectations aren't clearly identified during the observation. When children do need to be reminded because behavioral issues do occur, are the expectations clear? And are they consistently enforced? Let's watch the clip below, and before moving on to the next slide, write down evidence you see that you think highlights the bullets of this dimension.
So where your eyes supposed to be?
Hello.
Where your body supposed to be?
Square.
Your head supposed to be?
That.
And where your legs supposed to be? Unless.
You talk about the circle.
Yep.
Behavior management evidence highlighted during this clip includes the teacher reviews the classroom rules with the group, setting the clear behavioral expectations, and the teacher is proactive, anticipating problem behaviors before they happen. The second classroom organization dimension is known as productivity. It considers how well the teacher manages instructional time and routines and provides activities for students so that they have the opportunity to be involved in learning activities. Dimension looks at things like whether children have activities, to the degree which disruptions, transitions, or waiting for the teacher or an activity to start affect children's opportunities to learn. In classrooms scoring high on productivity, it would be difficult to imagine squeezing any more instructional time into the day because everything flows like a well-oiled machine. Children have choices when finished and know where to spend their time and attention because they know what to do, the materials are prepared, and their teacher can focus on them rather than managerial issues. Watch the clip below, and before moving on to the next slide, write down evidence you see that highlights the bullets for this dimension.
What else should we put in that dimension? Are we gonna draw some more fish, or are we gonna draw some of this, the rocks or the piece of wood? Yeah. They might need help with the tape recorder. I'm gonna go back there. There's another.
Productivity in this clip. The big one was that how the teacher handled the disruption. So there was a quick disruption. So there was a question about the tape recorder, and the teacher quickly brought the focus back to the children's drawing. So time was not lost in dealing with the disruption. We've covered behavior management and productivity so far in the classroom organization domain. The third and final dimension in this domain is known as instructional learning formats. This is one example where the title of the dimension may cause some confusion. So let's read the definition. It focuses on the ways in which the teacher maximizes students' interests, engagement, and ability to learn from lessons and activities. Instructional learning formats, like other dimensions, looks at the students. In this case, how interested are they in their activities? Are they listening and focused and working hard? Are they actively participating, or are they more passive with more rote or disengaged participation? Strategies captured by class for instructional learning formats look at how the teachers are involved to promote this involvement. Are the materials interesting and creative, with hands-on activities and a range of auditory, visual, and movement incorporated to grab students who learn in different ways? Is book reading more dramatic to really pull the children into the story? Are materials and centers presented in a way that children are excited and purposeful in their exploration? Clarity of learning objectives basically means that the teacher focuses children's attention on the purpose of the activity or lesson. If children were asked what they were going to do and why, could they be able to tell you? Watch the clip below, and before moving on to the next slide, write down evidence you see that you think highlights the bullets for this dimension.
What do you think happens in the spring with all these animals? What do you think they're busy doing? Come on over. They come out, and what do you think is going to happen with them? We are all going to get a piece of paper. You think they're going to lay eggs? When do they lay eggs? Do they lay eggs in the winter? Do babies come out in the winter? Too cold. When do you think they come out? In spring or summer? Or fall?
Evidence highlighted in this clip included the teacher asked questions to encourage children to participate. Looking at the children, they were engaged and interested, and there were different hands-on activities with the sand and animals. We're now acquainted with the 3 dimensions included in the classroom organization domain. Here's a snapshot of how child care centers, Head Start sites, and school-based programs are doing in Minnesota. We see that the scores are at the high end of the mid-range. Thinking about your classroom or program, which of these dimensions do you see in your classroom, or do you see yourself doing well? Is there an area that has room for improvement? We are now moving on to the 3rd and final class domain known as instructional support. The 3 final dimensions included in this domain all have an element of intentionality to them. It's as if you can actually see the teacher thinking, I'm going to make them think hard about this, which is concept development. I'm going to make them work for this answer, not just give it to them, quality feedback. And I'm going to get these children to use and hear high quality language, which is language modeling. Watch the video clip and note where we see the teacher encouraging children to think, where she gives feedback to the children or child, and how she models and promotes language.
What is it?
Alligator.
Just one alligator? Where's the head?
Up here.
Oh, does it have a tail?
Right there. Tail.
Yeah.
Happy.
How did you think to make an alligator? Oh, because Rochelle read the alligator book? Yeah. Do you want to make a picture of where the alligator lives?
See a wing, a one.
Yeah, I see that.
You've probably had examples of strategies on your list that relate to the class list above. That's great, because when you observe, you're picking up on the subtle interactions and dynamics between the individuals in the room and can probably fairly easily group those into 3 broad domains: social, emotional, managerial, and instructional. If it's something on your list that didn't quite match, it's okay. The list highlighted on this slide is not meant to be complete, but could be one reason for the mismatch. Another likely reason is that the way class describes interactions is based on a very specific set of criteria tied to each dimension. First dimension in the instructional support domain is known as concept development. It measures the teacher's use of instructional discussions and activities to promote students' higher order thinking skills and cognition, and the teacher's focus on understanding rather than rote instruction. To the name, concept development is not about developing specific concepts. It's about strategies teachers use to really push children's thinking further and deeper. Strategies include analysis and reasoning. For example, what kinds of how and why questions are children asked? What kinds of predictions, classifications, and comparisons are they asked to make? Are they asked to evaluate the outcome of their work? Concept development does not focus on right or wrong answers. Rather, it focuses on how students are presented with opportunities to make their own connections in ways that deepen their understanding of a concept. Take, for example, the book The Mitten by Jan Brett. Asking children to name which animals went into the mitten is an example of a recall question that does not push children to think further. Asking them instead to think about what might fit in their own mitten opens up the conversation for them to reflect on what they know about various properties of items that could or could not fit in their mitten. My tricycle might not fit, but I bet these beads, coins, pegs, nails would fit. It requires them to think about what they already know and pull from a variety of sources to make comparisons and predictions that create new links in their learning and understanding. Other strategies teachers use to push children's thinking include opportunities to create, for example, brainstorming. Tools are things that are used to make a job easier. What are some tools you know of that make jobs easier? Or what do we need to be able to make this tower? We also have an easier time learning when we are reminded what we have been exposed to and have learned before. For example, okay, you're going to get a chance to work with these color plates at the light table. Remember last week when we mixed colors with paint? What happened? And we also have an easier time learning a new concept when explicit connections to our lives are made. We're talking about collections where things were grouped together because they are similar. What kinds of collections do you have in your own homes? Let's watch the clip below, and before moving on to the next slide, write down the evidence you see that you think highlights the bullets for this dimension.
Okay, let's lay all the cards out. Let's just count all the cards. So let's see. Let's count them all together. So how many do we have here? Let's go.
6.
How many for you? All right, let's see how many I have.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Who's got more? Who's got less? Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Like that.
No, that's another way. Nick's showing another way. You can count by pairs. 1 pair, 2 pairs, 3. You want 2 more? There's 2 more.
You have 5 pairs.
Yeah, James is saying he has 2 more pairs than I do. Right. He has 5 pairs. I have 2 pairs.
No, I want to.
How about the table? You can join us. You know, I can see where.
Concept development evidence highlighted in this clip included the teacher asking children to compare the amount of cards. So they had to decide who had more or less. The second dimension in instructional support is called quality feedback. It assesses the degree to which the teacher provides feedback that expands learning and understanding and encourages continued participation. It does not focus on telling children whether their answer is right or wrong, but rather the strategies the teacher uses to lead children to a new understanding or realization based on the child's response. For example, a teacher might ask the question, "How do we know it's summer?" And a child in Minnesota might respond, "Because the trees don't have any leaves." Often the tendency is to either ignore an incorrect response or immediately give the correct answer. Quality feedback focuses instead on using that child's response to help guide them to the correct answer by using the following strategies. So the first is scaffolding. So giving hints or assistance to make them work for their answer. For example, well, let's think about that. What are the seasons of the year? And what do we know about those different seasons? What else do we know about trees? Or what else do you know about the world when trees don't have any leaves? Second strategy could be a feedback loop. That's holding back and forth exchanges about the topic where the teacher persistently asks follow-up questions that are connected to the topic. Another strategy is prompting thought processes, getting children to explain their thinking. So, for example, tell me more about that. What makes you think trees don't have any leaves in the summertime? Another strategy is providing information. The teacher expands or clarifies a little to get the child on track without saying the answer is right or wrong. So for example, that's true that trees do lose their leaves during the year, and that usually happens when it's cold because the trees have to close up tight to protect themselves. And finally, encouragement and affirmation. This is more than just a good job type statement, which comes at the completion of an activity. It's more about the praise or encouragement that keeps children trying and testing. It keeps them persisting in their guessing because they know they're getting recognition and reinforcement that keeps them trying. So for example, a teacher might say, "Oh, I can really see you're thinking hard about what you know about seasons, and you're coming up with really great ideas. What else do you know about seasons?" Together, these strategies provide students with feedback about their work in a way that keeps them involved in learning from the process rather than just randomly guessing or being told something is right and wrong. The children and adults are traveling together on a connected path to the correct answer, but it's the process rather than the destination per se that matters for quality feedback. Watch the clip below, and before moving on to the next slide, write down evidence you see that you think highlights the bullets for this dimension.
How did you make this? What part is this?
The wheels.
Wheels. Well, if these are the wheels, The whole thing? 5?
Quality feedback evidence highlighted during this clip included frequent back and forth exchanges about the car the child built. These exchanges pushed the child to continue learning and understanding. We've made it to the last dimension. Along with concept development and quality feedback, language modeling is the final dimension that makes up the instructional support domain. It captures the quality and amount of the teacher's use of language stimulation and language facilitation techniques. Language modeling similarly captures very intentional teaching strategies. In this case, those focused on getting children exposed to and using high quality language. What is it that the teacher does to get the children talking? Language modeling strategies include the amount of conversations in the room, among children and adults, and among the children themselves. Questions can either be close-ended, so requiring one-word answers like yes or no, or open-ended, requiring a more than one-word response. In high-quality language modeling classrooms, many open-ended questions are asked which require children to formulate and use their words to create longer answers. Other strategies include repeating and extending on children's verbal bids to acknowledge and expand on what the child said. For example, you could say, "You went to the pet store with your father? That sounds fun. What did you see at the pet store? Lots of animals? What kinds of animals? Did they sell other things at the store?" Self and parallel talk refers to real-time mapping of the teacher's actions or those of the children to help connect the words to actions. So for example, the teacher might say, "I'm walking over to the pencil sharpener and I'm sharpening the pencil so the lead gets a nice sharp point." If you've ever studied a foreign language, you know that you are more likely to learn and use new vocabulary when someone presents you with a new word and then defines it in a way that is already familiar to you. This is captured by advanced language on the class tool and makes a difference for children learning language as well. An example might be, "Yes, the fish in our classroom live in an aquarium. That is a bowl or a tank filled with water where the fish live." Watch the clip below. Before moving on to the next slide, write down evidence you see that highlights the bullets for this dimension.
Actually, what did you do in the storytelling group today? You don't know? Who else is in the story? Samson, what did you do in the storytelling group today? You drew? What did you draw? Elizabeth drew a moose for you? Wow, did you tell a story about the picture? You had chocolate? Oh, there was a chocolate too. Okay.
Language modeling evidence we saw during this clip included the teacher asking questions that required children to answer with a more than one word response. And we also observed the teacher repeating and extending the children's responses. You have now become acquainted with the 3 dimensions included in the instructional support domain. Here's Minnesota's instructional support data. It looks quite a bit lower than the averages in the other domains. Thinking about your classroom, do you see any of these dimensions in your practice? Are any of these unfamiliar or perhaps a new way of thinking about learning? It is clearly harder to do well in the instructional support dimensions. Take a minute to think about why that might be. We know that these strategies are important for children's learning, but what makes it so hard to use these strategies in a way that makes a difference? Could it be expectations for children are different? The teacher training involved? There's just not enough time in the day. You have to focus on other types of things. It's important to remember that the thresholds for making a difference on children's learning for the instructional support domain is lower than those discussed on the section for emotional support, which needed a level of about a 5, with a difference to be noted on children's standardized assessment scores. National research indicates that moving class and instructional support scores to even mid-level, that means as low as a 3 on the 7-point scale, is enough to make a significant difference on children's performance on school readiness assessments. This is exciting because it shows that it's possible. It's difficult, but it's also possible. In Minnesota's studies so far, approximately 12 to 20% of parent-aware classrooms score 3 or above. Observers note teachers attempting to use strategies captured by instructional support. However, it's just not done as frequently, consistently, or intentionally as needed in order to create the difference for children's learning. When the strategies are employed, the effects are powerful and meaningful, but it also takes time to support and to implement them as well. Now that you've become acquainted with the class tool, which dimensions reflect strengths in your own classroom? Which dimensions highlight areas of growth and professional development?